Alex, thank you so much for joining me on Making Product Sense.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Let's start with a little bit of your background. So you come from history with Twitter, Stripe, and then founding Clearbit, and now being chairman of that as you start Reflect. I would love to know, what are some of the early lessons you've learned from your experience working for other companies, as well as founding your own, that you've taken into Reflect and that you hold dear?
Stripe gave me a lot of lessons about what to do, and maybe Twitter about what not to do. I would say I came out of Stripe with a real appreciation for good design. Stripe have a world-class design team, and when I joined Stripe, I was working on some of their designs, implementing them. I was a software engineer, and I wouldn't make them exactly perfect. I would think, you know what, it's 99% of the way there, it's good enough. And then they would ask me to do it again and again. And that was really good learning, honestly. Just getting that level of perfection, that bar is really important, especially when you're running your own company, because the only person who's going to set that bar is you. So that helped. That was a great thing to learn. On the Twitter
side, we're going to circle
side,
back around to taste in a little bit, because I really appreciated your article on that. We'll put a pin in that. For sure.
Yeah, oh, you have done your homework. Yeah, no, I'm a big believer in taste companies. And then when it came to Twitter, I was there maybe when there were 1,000 people, and it just really showed me how bloated orgs can become. This was a long time ago, and they only got worse since then. I had no idea what half the people there were doing. I knew they weren't doing much work because I wasn't doing much work. And it's amazing what has happened recently. Whether you agree or disagree with some of the changes being made at Twitter, you can't deny that they are shipping faster. And they're shipping faster with 20% of the company. Yeah. What does that teach you? That teaches you that shipping speed is entirely a cultural thing. They already had the engineers. They weren't shipping stuff. It is to do with culture, and it's to do with internal process. And now they're just shipping like crazy.
And looking on their history, they've cycled through, 4 or 5 different chief product officers in the last 5 years. And despite each of them being world-class in their own right, the shipping cadence didn't really change much during those 5 years, which is pretty wild.
I think it's up to the CEO. Yeah. You have to come in with a sledgehammer and change the culture completely. And that's what happened. Yeah, one head of product, unfortunately, is not enough to move the tanker.
So true. Speaking of CEOs, you have been blessed to be able to be coached by Matt Mochary, who is a world-class CEO coach. What are some of the takeaways that you've learned from him that have carried over into how you run Reflect today?
Oh, Matt Mochary, I was so lucky. I got him right at the start of his career. Otherwise, he wouldn't work with this company my size. But I actually ended up co-writing a book with him. Or I say co-write, I lightly edited. He wrote the book called The Great CEO Within, which has got a lot of the things he taught me in there. The great news is you can go and just read that right now to get an idea of what his coaching is. But I would say it's very process oriented. He comes into your company and he sits down with you, and he's with you in all your meetings. And he just sets up these processes so that you can essentially do all of your one-on-ones back to back on one day. And then you have the rest of the week freed up. As CEO, that's amazing, because then you have the rest of the week to be creative. But that's one of the main things, man. There's so much in that. He taught me to really listen, taught me to repeat back, to make people feel heard. He's just the master at systems. Like, he has a Google Doc for everything. So I really recommend, if people are interested, go and read that book, The Great CEO Within.
Highly recommend. I believe he also open sourced all of his Word docs that you mentioned as well. So anybody can go and check those out. If anyone's interested, I'll link them in the show notes. But yeah, appreciate you sharing those lessons from not only your work history, but also from Matt. I want to move into the meat of this interview, which is Reflect, because I've been a long time note taker and have found my way through the Evernote world and then into outliners, which is kind of where I found my preferred method of note taking. And so I've got to start with, why did you decide to choose to build a tool for thought? It feels like note-taking apps are almost a cliche in the sense that as a developer, everyone has to build their own note-taking app at some point.
Yes.
But the way that you've done it has been so beautiful, and I'm just such a fan. So yeah, bring us into the thinking around why you chose that.
Let's just say there are note-taking apps, and then there are note-taking apps. And you're right, a lot of developers do try and scratch their own itch, but typically they leave it at the kind of the markdown phase, which is just the very start. Building a notes app is unbelievably complicated, like a proper full-featured one that has a WYSIWYG and offline sync and end-to-end encryption. These are really difficult problems. And now you're adding AI into the mix as well. This is like the cutting edge of technology to build these notes apps, which is honestly what makes your question even more valid, given that it's so complex. And yet there are some really good solutions out there. Why did you do this? Why does the world need another notes app? I don't have a good reason for you other than it's a very special passion project for me. I came out of Clearbit, which is a data business that I built to a couple of hundred people, and I hadn't been coding for a few years. I really wanted to get back to basics. I wanted to get back to shipping every day, to writing code. That's what I love doing. I wanted to try my hand at consumer. I had been in B2B the whole world. I wanted to see if I could do consumer. It's a lot harder. I had no idea when I started how much harder it is, but I wanted to try that. I wanted to build a tool that I use every day. That again, that's probably not really possible in B2B. It's at least it's a lot more difficult. I also wanted to build a small company. Again, B2B is difficult. You have to have a fairly sizable sales and marketing team, and I wanted to avoid all of that. And today, Reflect is just 4 of us, and we serve roughly 2,200 customers, which is amazing that you can do that these days. This kind of company has only been possible in probably the last decade, when you have all these tools and frameworks that let you automate things like sysops. And even when it comes to your like accounting, it's all fairly automated at this point. So I can just concentrate on doing what I do best, which is build product.
I love that. Is there a particular reason why you chose to go with the outliner note-taking style?
Yeah, I was just looking at my doc and thinking, okay, I want to build something. I want to build something I use every day. Which of these apps can I replace? And then I was like, you know what? Apple Notes. I'll build a note-taking tool. Yeah, not a very sophisticated market analysis, I grant you, but the whole point of this project was its very personal passion. And there were other people out there who liked what I was doing and had a similar way of thinking to mine, then great. If not, no worries. Luckily, at this point, it's not really a money motivation for me. And so that was kind of the genesis of it. There are lots of different types of note-taking tools. There's some ones which are just like a strict hierarchy, like maybe workflowy. There are some that are completely unrestricted, like Apple Notes. You have Roam, which is what I classify as an outliner, where they just restrict you to bullet points. I wanted something on the fairly unrestricted side, just because that's how I like writing notes. Yeah, everyone's a little bit different. And I sometimes like writing with bullet points. Sometimes I love writing long essays. And I wanted just a beautiful interface that would support both.
I love that. I've been a long-time Roam user, was one of the early believers that helped support that early movement and really saw the vision for what they were trying to build, because the idea of outliners with a node is infinitely nestable. And so you don't get stuck in this hierarchy of folders. Everything has parent and children nodes. And then the backlinks revolutionized and rewired my brain again on how I thought about how things related to each other. So when I was talking with Sam about Reflect and I started playing with it and using it, it felt familiar. It felt like exactly the tool that I wanted as far as how I thought. So you said you had a small band of people who thought like you. That I would raise my hand as probably one of
That's
those.
good to hear.
Yeah, and what's interesting with the outliners and the backlinks is we've effectively set ourselves up for success when it comes to AI. And that's the next part I want to dive into. With nodes having parent nodes and children nodes that, like I said, are infinitely nestable, there's a good chunk of context that's built into a single node. And so when you run an AI query against it, there's a lot that can be done just based on the context of its parent or its children. Can you talk more about that and how Reflect is thinking about implementing AI with the database of nodes that you build?
Absolutely. So if you think about how the brain works and remembers things, it typically works with association. I think there are some people who are more hierarchy driven than others, but typically when you remember something, you are thinking through associations. So if you think back to the last thing that you forgot, maybe your keys, what have you, the way you remember is you're like, okay, what do I remember that was associated with that item? And it might be the last room that you're in. With Reflect, it's that person works at a specific company, and you might have forgotten their name, but you remember the company they work for. And because all these notes are connected through associations, you can trace this path. And because it's in digital form, it doesn't erode. Like our brains erode over time, the memory erodes. And so we can use this as a backup to our memory. What's really fascinating is seeing some of these AI developments and how they work. Because was it like 10 years ago, there was a paper released called Word to Vector. I don't know if you're familiar with this. That changed everything. Someone figured out that they could essentially put a word into vector space. And it's like a graph. It is, except a graph might be 2D, but this is very similar where a word is associated with the other words around it. And people developed this technology and they started using the meaning of sentences rather than just words. But this is exactly how GPT-3, GPT-4 work. It is an incredible technology, and all they're doing is looking at this vector space and trying to predict the next word based on the previous words. So that gets us to reflect, like, how could AI impact this? Like you said, we already have a lot of these associations being tagged through backlinks. We can use AI to do this automatically. We can use semantic search to essentially put all of our notes in and the words in them into vector space, and then transfer through the nodes or move through the nodes via vector space rather than having to manually backlink and mark up these nodes. And the potential is massive. The privacy implications are also massive as well. Your notes are your most sensitive items. I think probably more sensitive than anything else. You can change your credit card number if it gets lost, but you might not even want your spouse to look at your notes, okay? But these are essentially your innermost thoughts. That is why in Reflect, we end-to-end encrypted the notes. This obviously has some drawbacks. When it comes to AI, for example, we can't just send all of your notes to OpenAI to vectorize them and ask questions about them. That's the line in the sand that we've drawn. There are companies out there like Mem, for example, that will just send everything over there. And I just feel uncomfortable with that. So what we are doing is essentially waiting until we can run these models on the client side. And the time is it's going to happen very soon. We have actually been sponsoring a bunch of GitHub projects to make this happen even faster. But Chrome just released Web GPU, which is the next thing we need to implement this. So essentially, we'll be able to run these models client-side. So what does that let us do? So it lets us do semantic search, so you can search via meaning, not just exact words. It lets us do auto backlink population. It lets us do predicting the next word in Google Docs and in Gmail. There's just a great feature that essentially completes whatever you're writing. Again, we'll be able to do that. We'll be able to do spelling and grammar detection much better than is natively possible on the OS. And then we've already done some of the things that we could do already. So we have GPT-4 integration, and we have Whisper integration. And GPT-4 is essentially a tool you can use to transform text. So text prompt goes in one end, different text comes out the other end. What happens in the middle is up to you. You can get very creative about it. We have shipped a GPT-4 integration with a set of system prompts. And these prompts will let you do things like, hey, take this big block of text and pull out the to-do items, the tasks, the action items, or summarize this text, or turn this text into a blog post. Or one prompt I have loved is taking my favorite writers and saying, turn this text into a paragraph as if written by this writer. And that has been working really well with GPT-4. And we let you save these prompts and reuse them. And then we've integrated Whisper, which offers nearly human level audio transcription. And this I use every single day. In fact, it has become my primary interface to the computer. I use a little app called superwhisper.com, which is still under development, but I use that instead of typing now. And inside of Reflect, I use our native Whisper integration to journal. And I've actually found that when I say my journal, rather than write it, it changes in a way that I like. It becomes more filled with emotion, and I cover more things. And then I also summarize it as well. So that is how AI can influence Reflect. When I started Reflect this more than 2 years ago, I didn't anticipate AI to be at this level already. It's just a happy chance that Reflect came along at exactly the same time as AI is coming along. And now it's integrated in the product, and it's awesome.
It has been game changer. And man, your answer was so good and so thorough. I have so many directions I want to go with this. But let's start with this one. If you have something that exists in vector space, let's say you type a note about how you were feeling yesterday, that semantic meaning is captured by its placement in the vector space, which is a little complicated to think about, but it is relationally and geographically near other notes with similar semantic meanings, right? Which to me, I could be ignorant here, but it almost eliminates the need for things like backlinks or folders or any other structural organizational system that notes have typically adopted in the past. Am I thinking about this wrong, or in the future, will we be able to throw notes at a blank screen effectively and it be semantically associated with our other notes, and we don't really even have to worry about backlinking?
Yeah. So, and when you say throw, I suspect it'll be say and transcribe, and you'll be able to hover over any sentence and click it, and you'll be able to see a list of all the similar notes. It's going to be amazing. It's very close. I suspect all of this will happen this year.
I think so too. You mentioned journaling through transcription, through talking. And I've recently adopted a similar practice. Every morning I talk into my phone, say, hey, this is a to-do that I want to get done today, or this is how I was feeling yesterday, or this is something I'm worried about and I really need to make sure I get clarity from my team on. And I have a prompt that I've custom created that will auto tag these. It'll extract the meaning and be like, okay, this is a to-do, let's tag it with to-do. This is a question, let's tag it with question. And I have these custom tags that I've told the prompt, hey, look for these things in particular and add these tags to them, which then of course will auto sort into my to-do list or my list of questions that I need to answer for the day, which has been absolutely game changing. Otherwise, I'd have to think through these things and type them out. And while that has worked in the past, things have become increasingly more fluid. I don't forget things as much because I say them when they're top of mind. I don't have to worry about categorization and organization. It's been really wonderful. Okay, let's talk about some of the privacy concerns or just the topic of privacy for a little bit, because this is one thing that I am particularly worried about when it comes to my notes. I don't like the idea of sending my notes into OpenAI. As you mentioned, they're some of the most personal things that I own. When there's a GPT-4 prompt created, is that unencrypted for the time that it is sent to OpenAI and returned? And what's the process of how you are thinking about that?
Yeah, so we would essentially only send your notes to OpenAI if there is an action that you explicitly take. So in this case, it would be highlighting a paragraph, pressing Command J to open our AI prompt, and explicitly selecting a prompt to send it to OpenAI. At that point, yes, the text and the prompt is all sent plain text to OpenAI so that their servers can read it, and their response is sent back. We don't tell OpenAI who made the request. So that I think is also quite important as well. So it could be like any one of our thousands of customers. Also, OpenAI, as part of their terms of service, say that they delete the data after 30 days. So I think we have a good middle ground right now. Ultimately, I do expect you to be able to run something like as good as GPT-3 or 4 on your computer. I think ultimately that will happen because the limitation right now is the speed of light, and that is something that we'll never overcome, and we have to bring the models to the client. That's the only way we're going to reduce latency between us and the models.
Absolutely. It makes me naturally go toward the movie Her. Have you seen that movie?
Yeah. And I think the future is honestly going to look a lot like that, with a lot less user interface. It'll just be you communicating with this AI. It'll be very personal. Its prompts will be built up over time so that they're very custom to you. And I think it'll be people's best friend, honestly. It's scary to think about, but it's also very exciting. Imagine having a genius thought partner to work with. Right now, if you want a genius thought partner to work with, you have to pay them a lot of money. Right? And most people just can't afford that. You essentially have to start a large business, attract this kind of talent, pay them a huge amount of money. And even then, they will do other stuff during their day. They're not ready at your every whim. Whereas this is going to be like a very personal thought partner that never gets tired and is the smartest person.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is the idea of taking that genius thought partner, combining it with your notes, and effectively you're having a conversation with yourself, with your own thoughts, which to me is mind shattering because I've naturally had to, over the years, go search for something that I may have wrote about at one point. And so I'm like navigating through my backlinks, trying to find that one thought that I knew I had and I couldn't quite remember, or that quote that I thought was so poignant, but I just can't remember who said it. And now with speech to text, with Whisper, and then eventually with text to speech, all being so fast and local on your device that you could feed it in the context of your notes, you can literally have a conversation with yourself, which will be absolutely mind-blowing. I'm so excited.
It will be. Yeah, we're so close. All we need right now is to have slightly bigger contexts.
One of the things that was interesting that Sam, your head of growth, wrote about in an article was being able to ask questions of yourself. For example, which city should I live in? It can analyze the thoughts that you've had and written about over the years and say, you really seem to like all of your vacations to Colorado. You love skiing, you love hiking in the mountains. Perhaps you could move there. It's only a 5-hour drive from your parents, and the cost of living is appropriate with your salary. Stuff like that could be analyzed and extracted out in a way that maybe could suggest some cities you've never even thought of before.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, some of those big questions, like where should I live, who should I marry? Like that's true. It seems feasible. It seems very possible. You know, what I'm particularly looking forward to is what I think is going to happen in 10 years' time, which is the singularity. Essentially, these AIs start improving themselves. And a lot of people don't like talking about this, even though all these AI researchers fundamentally believe in it and are working towards it. And we don't like talking about it because it sounds absolutely crazy. It sounds like we've joined a cult and that we're waiting for the end of times. And I always thought, you know what? Yeah, it does. It's got like a lot of religion culty vibes to it. But if I was being pitched to by someone at my doorstep and they were like, look, this thing is happening in the next 10 years. And I'm like, sure, fine. And then they were like, okay, let me prove this to you. I'm going to show you like a little miracle right here. I'm going to do a miracle in front of you. And then I saw this miracle happen. I'd be like, wow, maybe they're right. Maybe they're onto something. And that is what I think is happening right now.
Yeah. We have a few minutes left. Let me wrap up with this question. Every founder has a vision for their company that goes beyond what the company is currently. What is that vision for you for Reflect? That, let's call it the 10-year vision of what Reflect could be in its most, I hesitate to use this word, but perfect state.
I'll give you the 1-year vision and the 10-year, because I think it's quite important not to lose focus, because all these shiny things can come along and you can get excited and work on the next thing. And ultimately, if your Notes app is not fast or is buggy, then it doesn't matter. You've got the shiniest features integrated. We have been very stable for a long time, but we're not fast enough. Like, our app doesn't open faster than Apple Notes on the mobile. And we also have memory issues with big graphs. So that is something that we are, like, number one thing we're working on right now. We've got to improve the speed of it. It's got to open as fast as Apple Notes, otherwise you're not going to use it instead of Apple Notes. I want to build out a really good tasks integration. I think it is going to be very difficult to do this because I don't want to build a tasks app. And I think you could go down that rabbit hole. And I could totally see people still using Things, for example, alongside of Reflect, which is my favorite task app. But to-dos and notes are very closely related. It's our number one feature request. We need to build a really nice UI for tasks. All right, that's bread and butter. But let's talk about 10 years time. 10 years time, maybe Reflect doesn't have an interface at all. Maybe 10 years time, it's basically just the movie Her.
That's mind-boggling to think about, but it would be incredible.
And I do think ultimately the best kind of UI is no UI. That's why I love using Whisper and audio transcription. I think that could be the future of Reflect. And because of the open source movement, it's possible. This is one thing I did not predict. I've been looking forward to AI, AGI for a long time, but I did not predict this open source movement. It's been amazing. And now, over the weekend, there was 4 open source models released. It's nuts. And it's so cool that we're democratizing this, and everyone will be able to run these on their own machine. So yeah, I'll leave you with that. But thank you very much for your time today.
It's been so fun. I love getting the chance to nerd out with people who have thought deeply about what it means to take good notes, what it means to think well, how to capture that and also resurface it, the future of technology. It's all bundled up into this one app called Reflect. And I'm so thrilled to see people working on the very thing that I wish I would be building. So it's very cool. And I appreciate your efforts there. Thank you, Alex.